Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to another Mystery Monday. I hope you guys all had an amazing weekend. I hope your week is off to a great start. And if you're new here, welcome. We talk about true crime cases here on this channel on Mondays. So if that's something that you're interested in, then please come and join us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And today we're going to be talking about the case of Melanie Road. This case takes place in Bath, England. In 1984, 17-year-old Melanie Road went for a night out with some friends, but never returned home. Her case resulted in one of the biggest manhunts in Britain's history, and the police worked tirelessly to try and find her killer, yet it took more than 32 years until her case was solved. Before we do get into the case though, I just quickly want to thank our sponsor NordVPN. You guys know I love my Nord. I have been loyal to them for years now, guys. And actually years ago, before I tried Nord, I was kind of looking into getting a VPN. I tried a different VPN brand and I had to cancel because it sucked. I couldn't watch anything in different countries. For some reason, it just wouldn't work. It made everything really slow, my internet really slow, and I cancelled it after about a week, and Kerry recommended NordVPN. So I tried NordVPN and I have never looked back. I've been using them for years now. I've actually been using them recently to watch Maths Australia. Guys, it is the best reality TV ever. It's so good. It doesn't actually come out here in the UK until after the whole season has finished airing in Australia. I don't want any spoilers, right? My family watches it, so I use my VPN to watch it on 9Now, which is an Australian website. So you can only watch it in Australia unless, of course, you have a VPN. This year's season was so good too, guys. You have to watch it, even if only just for Jackie and Ryan. I also just have my VPN on my phone and my laptop 24/7 because the internet is a scary place, and NordVPN protects you from fake websites, scams, phishing links, malware. I can't imagine not having it on all the time. So honestly, guys, you really need to check them out, and they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. And also, if you go to nordvpn.com/bellafiore, you can get a huge discount with the purchase of a 2-year plan plus an extra 4 months free. So make sure you guys check that out. I'll leave all of the information in the description down below, and let's go ahead and get into today's case. So Melanie Ann Road was born on the 29th of September 1966 in Solihull, England, which is near Birmingham, and she was born to parents Jean and Anthony Road. She was raised alongside her 2 older siblings, so she had an older brother named Adrian and an older sister named Karen, and that meant that she was the youngest sibling. She was the baby of the family, and her sister said that they would lovingly call her the little duckling. By 1984, she lived with her parents in Bath on St. Stephen's Close. Her older siblings had moved out by this point. Her sister Karen was married with 2 children, and she lived with her family about 2 hours from Bath, and Adrian was away in Scotland for college. Melanie and her parents had moved to Bath about 2 years prior, and they loved it there. They settled right in, and Bath is one of England's safest cities. It really is such a beautiful place. Melanie was attending the prestigious Bath High School for Girls, and she was super popular there. She had no trouble making friends. Her family described her as bright and outgoing, just the kind of girl that everybody loved, the kind of girl that you wanted to be around, and she made people feel so comfortable because she was so easygoing. She was such a positive person. She was vivacious, and she just had such a love for life, so it felt good being around her. She really flourished in school as well. She was chosen by her peers to be the deputy head girl of the school. She had a lot of friends. She had a boyfriend. She loved playing sports and was on the hockey team. She was very bright, very intelligent. She was getting top marks in all of her A-level subjects, and she was really looking forward to continuing her studies in university. She had such a bright future to look forward to, and the world was really just opening up for her. But tragically, she would never get the chance to experience that. On the 8th of June in 1984, the Friday before her A-level exams, Melanie spent the afternoon with friends. She went and played tennis with some friends, and then that night she went and met up with her boyfriend Michael and a group of their friends so that they could go out into town, have some drinks. It was a Friday night. They headed out to the Kingston Road area of Bath, which is like the nightlife area where people go to have a good time, go clubbing, go drinking, that sort of thing. They went to a few different bars before ending the night at a place called Bow Bash nightclub. They stayed there until about 2 a.m., which is when all of the bars sort of closed and shut up for the night. And so they all were her and her group of friends were saying their goodbyes, getting ready to take their separate journeys to their separate houses. Melanie's boyfriend Michael offered to pay for a taxi for her to get home safely, and she decided that she wanted to walk home instead. It's something that she did often. She loved just, I guess, walking home after a night out. You're a little bit tipsy. The fresh air is nice. It's a warm summer's night. From the nightclub to her house at St. Stephen's Close, it was about a 30-minute walk. It was a relatively well-lit route home, and it was a route and a walk that she took often. So she knew it well and she felt comfortable walking home. Which is honestly so shit that women can't feel comfortable doing something as simple as walking home, even in a place that's known to be as safe as Bath. Women can't just walk home on a beautiful night or even during the day. Women can't just walk anywhere without having that fear. And it's so shit that that's the reality of the world that we live in. When Melanie left her friends to start her walk home from Broad Street, she never made it home. And in fact, that was the last time that she was ever seen alive. Just hours later at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday the 9th of June, the local milkman, a guy named Tony, and his 11-year-old son Ian were out on their regular milk delivery route when they came across a horrific sight. As 11-year-old Ian dropped milk bottles off at the houses along St. Stephen's Court, he found the body of a young woman lying in a pool of blood. The scene was brutal. She had been raped and had been stabbed 26 times. When the police arrived on the scene shortly after the discovery, they immediately sealed it off in order to preserve as much of the evidence as possible. Her body was found near a garage, and as police combed through the scene, on a nearby ledge they found a set of keys which had a wooden block attached to it, and on that wooden block was engraved the name Melanie. In an effort to identify her, the police drove around the nearby streets with their hailer, which is sort of like a microphone speaker sort of thing. And they basically drove around the streets just calling out the name Melanie, hoping that somebody would come out and say, "I know a Melanie, what's going on?" When Melanie's parents, Jean and Anthony, woke up that Saturday morning, it wasn't long before they noticed that Melanie had never returned home. They'd last spoken with her just the day before at around noon on the Friday before she headed out to play tennis with friends. And Melanie was a very responsible girl. She was not the type of girl who would go out without telling her parents where she was going to be when she was coming home. So it's definitely very concerning to them that her bed clearly had not been slept in. At the same time, she was a 17-year-old girl, and 17-year-olds can be unpredictable, they can be forgetful. So, it was possible that she had gone out for this night with her friends and had simply just stayed at a friend's house and she was going to be home any minute. So they really didn't want to raise the alarm too soon. But then at 9:15 a.m. is when they heard the name Melanie being called out on the loudspeaker, and Jean said that her heart just sunk when she heard this. She just knew in her heart that something was wrong. She said, quote, "I heard the loudspeaker outside the house calling Melanie. My husband and I just looked at each other, and there was a police officer's car going past and he was calling out Melanie. That's all I heard. Then I opened the front door and ran after the car, banging on the back of the boot. He stopped and he said, 'What did you want?' And I said, 'We have a daughter named Melanie and she hasn't come home.'" It was at this point that the officer broke the tragic news to her that her 17-year-old daughter had been brutally murdered. Jean recalls being driven back to her home by the police officer and said that her, quote, "whole life was taken over by this horrible deed. Melanie did not deserve that. Nobody deserves what happened to her." Her family were devastated at the enormous loss of their daughter and sister, and it had been just yesterday that they had spoken to her, and now she was gone forever. They said that as the days went on, they forgot to eat in their grief. They couldn't sleep because of the constant nightmares that they had. Jean recalled wandering around the streets of Bath, just visiting these places that they had gone to with Melanie, hoping to see a glimpse of her. Her death had a lifelong impact on her entire family, affecting them both professionally and personally in a way that I can't even imagine. They were devastated beyond comprehension, and they said that they really struggled to come to terms with a world that didn't have their daughter or their sister in it. The family really did receive such an outpouring of love and support from the community. They received cards, letters, and flowers, but no amount of gifts can fill the hole that Melanie's death left behind. It also completely rattled the community because Bath is known to be one of the safest places in England. It has a relatively low crime rate and violent untargeted attacks were uncommon. People in the area were scared, they were confused because things like this didn't happen in this area. And now they knew that there was somebody with enough venom to commit a crime like this that potentially lived amongst them. The Avon and Somerset police departments launched an investigation into the murder of Melanie Road, which soon expanded into a nationwide manhunt, which had the code name Operation Rhodium. The initial focus on the investigation was the crime scene, of course, and this was in front of a residential garage on a cul-de-sac near St. Stephen's Court, which was just 200 meters from her family home. A forensic pathologist visited the crime scene at 10 a.m. on the morning that her body was discovered, and he revealed that she had actually been raped twice. She'd been stabbed 21 times to the front of her body, 8 of which were to her breasts. The 5 stab wounds to her back were more shallow, which led investigators to come up with a theory that these had been prodding stab marks, indicating that the killer had likely prodded her with the knife to get her to move in whatever direction he wanted her to move in. Most of the stab wounds were also to the right of her body, which led detectives to believe that the killer was most likely left-handed. There was another pool of blood directly next to the garage near where her body was found, and this led detectives to believe that she was crouched, hiding behind the wall next to the garage before she was dragged further out towards the street and attacked further. The forensic pathologist took swabs of all of the blood at the scene, and there was a large trail of blood which started at her body and went on for about 800 meters. It led from the crime scene all the way to St. Stephen's Road. All of the blood spots at the scene and surrounding areas were swabbed and mapped out by the forensic pathologist. In total, there were 74 blood spots that were marked and recorded, and the forensic pathologist also drew a map of the scene and outlined every single piece of evidence. The blood spots that were found closest to where Melanie was discovered belonged to her, but there were 14 blood spots that belonged to a second profile, and they were kind of on what they called the getaway route. It was the trail of blood that led away from the body, and it indicated that the attacker had injured themselves during the attack. DNA evidence was also recovered from the scene of the crime. The attacker left semen behind, which confirmed that they were looking for a male attacker. But at the time in 1984, DNA was really still in its infancy, so they were more so using the blood evidence in order to try and find the killer. And the second profile of blood that was found at the scene had a very rare protein makeup that only 3% of the population actually had. The fact that the blood that belonged to the killer was so rare was really such a huge breakthrough because they can't really use DNA testing. There's not really a DNA database at this point. DNA testing is just so new, and they have such a huge task in front of them. Like, really, this killer could be any man in the area, any man who's even visiting the area. Like, it's a huge, huge pool of people, but now that pool has really shrunk to just 3% of the population, so it was massive. And police were now on a hunt to track down all of the men in the area, in Bath and in the surrounding areas, that had this rare blood type. As part of the investigation, police also went and checked every single hotel, every single guest house, and got a list of every man that was in the area at the time. So they weren't just looking at residents, they were looking at visitors, just any man that was in the area at the time that this attack occurred. They had over 8,000 names of men that were potential suspects that had been in the area at the time of the murder, and they swabbed over 2,500 of these men for DNA. Over the years, they made a bunch of arrests. They arrested, I think, about 94 different men, and they made over 6,000 separate lines of inquiry in this investigation. It was a huge investigation and a huge effort from police. They really did. This isn't one of those investigations where it's unsolved for so long because the police did a bad job. They really did everything that they could in this investigation to try and find Melanie's killer. They questioned and arrested men that were convicted of sexual crimes. They arrested men that were known to have knives on them at the time of the murder. Even men that they questioned and their alibis weren't quite up to scratch or didn't make a lot of sense, they would arrest them and question them and take DNA swabs from them. But of the 2,500 DNA swabs that they took, not a single one of those men was a match to the blood type that they had found at the scene of the crime. I mean, they were really looking for a needle in a haystack. There were 85,000 people that lived in Bath at the time, and so it was physically impossible for them to go and DNA test every single person that lived there and had visited on the day of the murder. You know, the police really did such a thorough investigation here. They left no stone unturned. They chased down every single lead that they got to the fullest extent. But despite this, despite multiple appeals by the police, by Melanie's family, eventually the leads dried up and the case started to go cold. It really seemed at a point that this case would never be solved. Despite the case slowing down though, it was never officially closed. In 1995, more than 10 years after Melanie's murder, there was a breakthrough with DNA technology and the UK's first national DNA database was introduced. Melanie's case was of course reviewed the same year and a DNA profile was made for her killer, but even in the growing DNA database, there was no match for her killer's DNA, which meant obviously that her killer had not committed another crime that required them to give DNA since the murder over 10 years earlier. Obviously, this was a little bit of a blow to investigators, but they were hopeful that this DNA database was only growing, so they hoped that one day there would be a match to this DNA that would help them solve the case. On the 9th of June, 1999, exactly 12 years after Melanie's murder, another young woman named Melanie went missing in Bath. Melanie Hall was born on the 20th of August in 1970 to parents Patricia and Steve. She graduated from the University of Bath in 1995 with a degree in psychology, and in 1996, at age 25, she went missing under remarkably similar circumstances to Melanie Road. She too disappeared after a night out clubbing with her boyfriend. So Melanie Hall had been out at a club called the Cadillacs with her boyfriend, a guy named Philip Karlbaum, and they got into an argument because she danced with somebody else at the club. So he ends up leaving the nightclub, and that left Melanie alone at the club. She was seen sitting on a stool beside the dance floor at 1:10 a.m. and then she went to the coat room, collected her coat, and she left, and she was never seen again. She was reported missing by her parents 2 days later on the 11th of June when she failed to turn up for work at Bath's Royal United Hospital. When news of her disappearance broke, it seemed to people like Melanie Road's killer had struck again. First of all, the circumstances were so similar. Both girls were named Melanie. They were both young women who had disappeared after a night out with their boyfriend in Bath, and it also happened on the exact same day, 12 years apart. It really seemed like just too many coincidences, too much of a coincidence, and so people started to connect these two cases. 12 years on from the murder of Melanie Road, the town was left wondering, had Melanie's killer struck again? Melanie Hall was missing for weeks, and as time passed, authorities began to fear the worst. She really wasn't the type of person to purposely disappear without saying anything, and with no sign of her or anything to indicate that she was no longer alive, there were a lot more questions than answers. Police really, again, they conducted a very thorough investigation into her disappearance. Unlike Melanie Road, her body hadn't been discovered. Police went out, they interviewed countless witnesses, they interviewed people that were out clubbing that night, they interviewed taxi drivers that had been working in the surrounding areas. A £10,000 reward was offered, and there were appeals made on Crime Stoppers and Crime Watch, and also by her sister Dominique. There were a few unconfirmed sightings of Melanie. On the night of her disappearance, one witness said that they had seen someone resembling Melanie at the Cadillacs nightclub talking to a man, and that they left together at around 2 a.m. This man was described as white, around 27 years old, 5'10", and a medium build with dark brown hair. He was allegedly also wearing black pants, black shoes, and a brown silk shirt. Another two women also said that they had seen somebody that resembled Melanie arguing with a man outside the church hall shortly after 2 a.m. And then another witness said that they saw a woman being coaxed into the nearby Podium car park. An EFIT was released of the man that police were looking for, but despite their best efforts, they were unsuccessful in locating Melanie's body. For years, Melanie remained a missing person, and in her investigation, police just ran into roadblock after roadblock, and eventually, on the 17th of November 2004, she was officially declared dead. It was long suspected that the two cases were connected, and there were a lot of theories and rumours floating around in Bath. There was one theory floating around that a known murderer named John Cannon was potentially involved. Some witnesses actually came forward and said that they had seen Melanie Hall being abducted, and that the man that they had seen abduct her was John Cannon. He was actually in prison at the time of her disappearance, but it was speculated that he potentially planned the murder from prison with a fellow inmate, which I guess doesn't make sense because unless he knows her, if he's not involved in getting that enjoyment from it, I don't know why he would do it. And ultimately, he has been ruled out as a suspect in Melanie's case. There were also connections made with Melanie Hall's case and somebody that was nicknamed the Batman Rapist. He attempted to carjack a woman just a few hours before Melanie Hall was last seen. He's never been identified, but he has been attributed to more than 17 sexual assault cases in Bath between 1991 and 2000. And the reason that he was nicknamed the Batman Rapist, which is such a stupid name, is because he left a baseball cap with a Batman logo on it at one of the scenes of one of the crimes. They're actually still looking for this guy, but he has managed to remain unidentified and hide from police for over 30 years now. There were often large gaps of time between some of his attacks, like there was a 3-year gap between 1991 and his next attack in 1994. So police speculated that maybe he didn't actually live in Bath and he was just a visitor, and that's why it's been so hard to locate him. He also hasn't attacked anybody else that police know of since the year 2000. So it's possible that he moved away from Bath, he died, hopefully he died, or maybe he just stopped committing crimes. I feel like people who commit, that many crimes of that nature, they never really stop. So in my opinion, he's either hopefully dead or moved somewhere else. He's also never been officially linked to Melanie Hall's case. Police speculate that he was involved, but they've never been able to officially link him because they also don't know who he is. But the time that he was active in Bath lines up with Melanie's case. On the 5th of October 2009, a motorway worker that was clearing vegetation from a slip road from the M5 motorway discovered a plastic bin bag which had human remains inside. This included a skull, a pelvis bone, and a thigh bone. Another plastic bag like the one this motorway worker found was also discovered in the same area, and they were both wrapped in string. And then more human remains were also found scattered in a field next to the motorway. Before a post-mortem examination could be conducted, they had found a ring amongst these remains, which they showed to Melanie Hall's parents, and they confirmed that this ring did belong to her and had been given to her by her grandmother. A post-mortem examination confirmed that the remains did belong to Melanie Hall. It was determined that she had suffered severe blunt force trauma to her head, her cheekbone, and her jaw. Miraculously, the police were actually able to extract DNA evidence from the string that was used to tie up the plastic bags that her remains were found in, but unfortunately they weren't able to find a match to this DNA. 4 days after the discovery of her remains, her parents did an appeal asking for anybody with any information to please come forward. It was such a difficult and devastating situation for her parents because they had spent so long looking for her, and now they had closure in the sense that they knew definitively that she wasn't out there anymore. She was dead and she had been murdered, but they still didn't know what happened to her. They didn't know who was responsible. There was no justice for her. And also just the fact that her body and her remains had just kind of been chucked in a field next to the highway, it's just so degrading. The way in which her body was discarded as well indicated to police that it was sort of a rush job. They had rushed to discard her body, and this kind of indicated that potentially it was not premeditated. It was maybe an opportunistic crime. The same month that her remains were found, police announced the fact that they had actually found 3 keys in the area where her body had been discarded, and these keys belonged to a Ford car. And so police announced that they were working with Ford to try and identify this vehicle. Later that year, Crime Watch launched a new appeal for any information in the case, and they also increased the reward to £20,000 for information, which resulted in 200 calls from the public. Her parents also reinstated a £50,000 reward for any information that would lead to an arrest and conviction. and Crime Stoppers also reinstated their £10,000 reward as well. The investigation continued over the years, with police not wanting to release really too many details so as not to alert the killer, but they said in 2019 that they had found DNA that belonged to the killer potentially, and they also expressed confidence that one day they would find the killer. By this point, they had arrested 11 people in the investigation, but nobody had been charged with the murder of Melanie Hall. And I just imagine how hard that is for the parents as well. For, these 11 men, it's kind of been a game of cat and mouse with the police, where somebody gets arrested, then they're released, and somebody gets arrested, then they're released. And that had been going on since before her body was even discovered. And I just can't even imagine how hard it is for the parents when somebody gets arrested and they have hope that their daughter is going to get justice, they're going to find out what happened to her, and then they're just released again. Her father, Steve, did say that the family remains eternally optimistic that one day justice might just prevail. He also went on to say, quote, "In our family, we will forever grieve and forever miss our lovely daughter, a young woman whose life stretched before her until that fateful night in June 1996, when that life was so cruelly snatched from her. She will never fulfill her life's ambitions, never marry, never have children, and my wife and I will never have another grandchild." And unfortunately, to this day, Melanie Hall's case still remains unsolved. Both law enforcement and her family remain optimistic that with increasing DNA technology every single day, one day someone will be charged with her murder. So over the years, there have been so many DNA advancements, and one of the most important ones, especially in this case, is the ability to link DNA profiles to people that are closely related to the person that DNA belongs to. So this technology, also known as familial DNA searching, basically means that because they have Melanie Rhodes' killer's DNA entered into a database system, if anyone closely related to that killer is entered in to the DNA database for any reason, it will show a match, or it'll show that it's a match to somebody in that person's family. On the 25th anniversary of Melanie Rhodes' murder, Crime Watch launched a TV appeal, which prompted 72 new leads to come in. And one of these leads was from a nurse who said that one of her patients confessed to Melanie Rhodes' murder, on his deathbed. This was obviously completely unexpected, and so police go out, they conduct a DNA test on his body tissue, and it comes back as a partial match. But then disappointingly, it's kind of these ups and downs in this case. They do further testing, the further testing comes back, and he is eliminated as a suspect. Which is also crazy to admit to a crime you didn't commit on your deathbed, because what is the point? But despite this huge letdown, they really had their hopes up with this partial match, and then they were just let so far down, but they still never gave up. In 2014, 30 years after Melanie Rhodes' murder, a cold case review was launched, and it was being led by Detective Superintendent Julie McKay. She actually wrote a book on this case called To Hunt a Killer, so it was a really interesting read. I definitely recommend checking that out if you want an even deeper dive into this case, or if you even just want the perspective of a detective who was looking into this case and helped solve this case. So with the information that had been gathered over the years investigating this case, they had a long list of suspects that they were trying to rule out one by one with DNA. Having no luck previously running the DNA through the database, they decided to run a familial search to see if they could pinpoint a close relative of the killer. Now, the first familial search that they didn't come back with any results, any matches, but with the DNA database growing every single day, they were hopeful that one day there would be a match. But obviously these DNA tests are expensive, so it's not something that they can just do every other week. If they also did get a DNA test, they would then have to, if it was a familial DNA test, they would have to kind of go and DNA swab all of the family members of whoever that familial DNA search was a match to. So it was still a huge task that they had ahead of them. Eventually, with enough persistence, Julie McKay was able to run another familial DNA search on the National DNA Database. And unlike the first test that they ran, this test returned a much more significant result. Somebody who had been noted as a somewhat close match on actually the first familial DNA test that they did had come back with a much stronger result this time, which indicated that somebody in their family was a match to the killer's DNA profile. So this person who was showing this strong familial DNA profile was a woman named Claire Hampton. She had given her DNA to the database, or she hadn't given it. Her DNA had been put into the database in 2014 for a minor domestic situation. When police were looking into her, they became interested in her father, a man named Christopher Hampton, who had lived in Bath at the time of Melanie's murder. So police get in contact with Claire, and through her, they're able to get in contact with her father, Christopher. He's now living in Bristol. He works as a painter and decorator. And they asked him if they can have a DNA swab because, he's had this familial match. He says yes. He willingly gives them his DNA, and the police that went and swabbed him said he didn't seem nervous or anything. And then when the results came back from his DNA swab, he was an exact match to the killer's DNA profile that was found at the scene of Melanie Rhodes' murder. Over 30 years had passed since her murder, and detectives and her family finally know the identity of her killer. And it was just an unimaginable amount of relief, I guess, a little bit of weight off their shoulders, because although it doesn't change their grief, it doesn't change what they've gone through, the fact that they have lost their daughter and their sister, it is a weight off their shoulders from having to tirelessly search for her killer for the last over 3 decades now. They had never given up in trying to find answers and trying to find justice for their sister and their daughter. Christopher Hampton was arrested on the 3rd of July 2015, and the 64-year-old was charged with Melanie's murder the following day. What really pisses me off is this guy had just been living his life all of these years without facing any retribution for what he had done. He'd been married twice, he'd had 4 kids, he'd lived an entire life, he'd lived an entire 3 decades. His family wasn't aware of the crime that he had committed, and they weren't even aware that he had been swabbed until obviously they find out he's arrested. Despite police's best efforts, they really did such a thorough investigation on this case, and despite their best efforts, he had avoided detection for over 30 years. He had never been on police's radar. He wasn't even one of the 95 men who had been arrested over the years in relation to Melanie's murder. When the police went to his house to finally arrest Melanie Rhodes' killer, his wife was just in complete disbelief. Her name was Julie. She was sure that they had the wrong man. She so much so thought it was a mistake that one of the officers at the scene arresting him recalled how she asked him if she was going to see him that evening. And Christopher responded to that saying, "No, you won't." It was obvious from these answers that Christopher knew at this point that he had been caught, that his actions all those years ago had finally caught up to him. He knew at this point that they had his DNA, and I'm sure, putting 2 and 2 together, he knew that meant that he had been a match to the killer's DNA. But despite this, when he was initially questioned by police, he remained completely silent. He didn't admit to raping Melanie, he didn't admit to killing her, and in fact, he's never given an account to police of what happened that night. He's never even explicitly admitted to what he did. After his arrest, Christopher Hampton's trial date was set for the 9th of March 2016 and was set to be held at Bristol Crown Court. In the lead up to his trial, he entered a not guilty plea, which confused me a little because from my understanding, they had him dead to rights. There was no way he could argue against the DNA evidence. When his trial came around, he was completely emotionless in court. His wife stood by him this whole time, right up until, in a move that shocked everybody, he changed his plea to guilty. Nobody even knows why exactly he changed his plea. Maybe he accepted his fate. Maybe he knew that there was no way that he could get out of this because of his DNA. His barrister noted that his client had a completely unblemished record, and he also said that in pleading guilty, he was pleading guilty to a moment of complete madness, is what he said. What he described, this double rape and murder. He raped her twice and then murdered her, stabbed her 26 times. The trial only lasted an hour and 20 minutes because he pled guilty. And on the 9th of May 2016, Christopher Hampton was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years. The judge said that the attack was for his own sexual gratification and said that he would likely die behind bars. He went on to say, quote, "You first stabbed her while she was on her feet on the street on her way home, before chasing her some 30 meters round the corner to the cul-de-sac where she died. You married and had a child and lived your family life for all those years, knowing the extreme misery you must have inflicted on your victim's family, but you were too callous and cowardly to put an end to their heartache." The sentencing was somewhat of a relief to her family, as much of a relief as it could be, really, and her family provided powerful victim impact statements at sentencing. Her sister Karen said, quote, "You would think that nothing could be worse than being told your little sister has been sexually attacked and brutally murdered. What's worse is no one being charged with her murder." Her brother Adrian said, quote, "I have spent the last 32 years worrying about every man that ever walked down the street, asking myself, did you kill our little sister Melanie? Every man that sat near to me in a restaurant, did you kill our little sister Melanie? Every man that I have ever met, could you have killed our little sister Melanie? Even my friends, did they kill our little sister Melanie? But now I know, thankfully, none of them killed Melanie. You did. You killed Melanie, you raped her, you mutilated her, and you chose to abandon her. You abandoned her when she was dying, our little sister Melanie." He also said, quote, "My 6-year-old daughter asked me, 'Daddy, why are you crying?' I had to tell her, the man who killed Auntie Melanie, my little sister, a long time ago, has now been caught, so we are all safe." I also want to read you her mother Jean's witness impact statement. She said, quote, "My name is Jean Rode and I am the mother of Melanie Rode. On the 9th of June 1984 at 9:15 a.m., our world fell apart. As we heard and saw a police car by the window, the officer was calling out Melanie's name. I ran out of the house, caught up with the car frantically banging on the boot, 'Stop, please stop.' The police officer escorted me back to the house, and that's when all hell let loose as our lives were taken over by the tragedy and horror when hearing of our daughter's death. As we waded through the questions, identification, and all that proceeds after a death as Melanie's, the impact it had on our individual lives was and still is devastating. We forgot to eat. Sleep was interrupted with constant nightmares. We lost weight. I wandered aimlessly through the streets of Bath, hoping to see a glimpse of Melanie, searching the places we had visited together. Where Melanie's blood was spilled, I prayed that it would not rain to wash it away, and when it did, I cursed the rain for finally taking it away. I felt even the weather was against Melanie and the family. We sat for hours, traumatized by the horror of knowing Melanie was gone forever. To never see her beautiful smile and girlish laughter hurts beyond repair. We were not functioning properly. We constantly had no energy. My husband refused to talk to me about Melanie. I never knew if he discussed his feelings with anyone else in the family or at work. Therefore, it was inevitable that we drifted apart. But we kept an artificial pretense to outsiders. Little did they know how we were suffering. Our son Adrian, Melanie's brother, was at the Nautical College in Glasgow. Our daughter Karen was in Solihull with her husband and 2 young children. They were notified by the police. When I spoke to Adrian, he said, "I can't cope, I'm coming home." This meant that he missed taking his final exams. We felt his future was now ruined. Karen arrived in Bath with her baby, who was 7 weeks old. She was breastfeeding her child, but the shock upon hearing Melanie's death caused her milk to dry up. The huge impact of the horror of Melanie's death permeated throughout the family members, grandparents, aunts, uncles, all relations, including school friends. Who knows what harm it has done to them? My husband returned to work, not sure if he was functioning properly there because he certainly was not functioning when at home. It was suggested I go back to work teaching, but I could not have borne the responsibilities of other people's children after what happened to Melanie. The horror of the way our daughter died hangs over us like a heavy lead weight which never moves away. Some days I think I've moved on with my life, but energy forsakes me and the weight presses further and further down. Sadly, Melanie's father, my husband, now lives in a haze of dementia hastened by our daughter's death. When will this pain stop? The horror of that sunny day in June will never leave us. Our patience has been tested, but we have survived these 31.5 years, not without heartache and sorrow, whilst we've waited for justice to take its course to hopefully allow Melanie to rest in peace. I was 49 years old in 1984 when all this happened. Now in my 81st year, I pray that the family will find some peace. Over the last 30 years, we have gradually been torn apart by this evil deed. Nothing will bring Melanie back, but I pray that the rest of the family can be reunited. The man responsible for this has, if you can even call him a man, has never shown any remorse for this crime. Even in court, he just sat there, stone-faced, totally emotionless, and he's never even had the decency to give her family that closure of what actually happened that night. Why he stabbed her 26 times. Sexual gratification is one thing, but that is such a brutal and venomous crime. The fact that he was able to live with himself for that long, he got married twice, he had 4 children, he just lived his life all those years knowing that he did this. And the fact that he was able to just live his life, over 3 decades, he had 3 children with his first wife, 2 children with his second wife. He just lived his life in a way that Melanie didn't get to. And nobody in his life ever suspected that he could do something like this. By all accounts, from everybody that knew him, they thought he was a good father, a respectable husband. Some experts believe that Melanie is not his only victim. One criminologist, Dr. Jane Monkton Smith, said, quote, "I find it very difficult to believe this was a one-off incident, largely because of the severity of it. Despite the similarities in the murder of Melanie Hall, there have never been any charges laid against him for that crime either. He's been ruled out in that case, and there's also been no evidence to ever suggest that he's committed any other crimes." The detective that took over Melanie Rhodes' case in 2009 believes that he probably is responsible for other crimes, namely the murder of a woman named Shelley Morgan, whose body was found just 2 days after Melanie Rhodes, and she too had been both stabbed and raped. Despite these theories, Christopher Hampton has never been charged with any other crimes, and either way, hopefully he dies in prison, which is what the judge believes will happen. But that's everything for today. That's all for this case. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you guys think that he is responsible for other crimes? I feel like people, or men who are involved in sexually motivated crimes often are responsible for other crimes, and so I think that he was. The way in which he murdered her was so brutal and so vicious and so venomous that I fail to believe that he never committed another crime. And I think it's also really disappointing the fact that he's been caught for this. He's probably going to die in prison, and yet he still will not give the family that closure of knowing exactly what happened that night and why he did it. Sadly, both of Melanie's parents, Jean and Anthony, have since passed away, but they live to see justice for their daughter, and they leave behind their 2 other children, Karen and Adrian, to continue Melanie's legacy. But like I said, that's everything for today. That's all from me. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.